In recent weeks, US-China relations have shown signs of thawing after a period of intense economic confrontation. President Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, once locked in disputes over tariffs, rare earth minerals, export controls and strategic tech competition, are now steering towards renewed dialogue. The breakthrough came through a framework agreement over TikTok's ownership, which set the stage for high-level talks. Public anticipation is growing after a phone call between Trump and Xi, as well as news of an upcoming meeting of negotiation teams to hammer out concrete steps, perhaps lowering some tariffs, easing export restrictions and restoring confidence in supply chains. Trump's announced visit to China, reportedly in response to Xi's invitation, further underscores this new diplomatic momentum. Yet, amid these economic overtures, underlying challenges remain. The question now is whether these steps can translate into durable cooperation or merely a pause in rivalry. I'm Henny Saif, and let's go in depth. Following recent diplomatic progress, experts see signs of potential further engagement between China and the US, aiming to ease mounting tensions. According to the South China Morning Post, analysts highlight that both countries are preparing for intensified consultations and negotiations across multiple fields in the coming months. This momentum follows a framework agreement on TikTok's operation in the US, and ongoing discussions towards stabilizing relations after recent escalations involving tariffs and trade restrictions. A possible state visit by the US president to China is also in advanced planning stages, underscoring growing efforts to foster dialogue and reach concrete agreements that could pave the way for a future summit. These developments may mark a significant step towards managing the complex and fragile bilateral relationship impacting global economic and geopolitical dynamics. China's President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump are poised to finalize a deal to keep TikTok operational in the United States, preventing its blackout. The New York Times stated that the agreement signals Beijing prioritizes gaining leverage on critical issues like tariffs and technology over TikTok's fate. This move can be seen as a strategic trade-off, where China is willing to compromise on the popular app to influence broader geopolitical negotiations with the US. The talks reflect ongoing complex diplomacy between the two powers, intertwining technology control with wider economic and security concerns in the increasingly tense US-China relationship. To help us delve deeper into the implications of this new chapter in U.S.-China relations, two experts will be joining us. Mr. Peter Tannis, the chairman of Links Investment Advisory from Washington, who offers an insight into the economic stakes and trade negotiation dynamics, and Mr. Marvin Lee, the geopolitical analyst from Hong Kong, will examine the broader regional and strategic implications. Together, they explore the prospects and pitfalls of this evolving relationship in a tumultuous global environment. Welcome, gentlemen, to In Depth. Peter, I'll start off with you first. Can you set the scene for us? What are the main economic pressures motivating Washington now towards this recent framework deal? Is it TikTok, the rare earths, tariffs? How do you see it?
Nice to be with you again, Hani. Look at it this way. The negotiations with China are now divided into two tracks. TikTok is one track, and everything else, and it's a pretty big agenda, is on the other track. The TikTok track is it is evolving right now as we speak. The conversation between President Trump and President Xi has already begun. It started over an hour and a half ago, so they're on the phone or it has been concluded. We expect a TikTok deal to emerge from that, and later on, if you want, we can speculate on who the American buyer of the company is going to be. The other side are the trade negotiations, as you mentioned, on all of the other issues, and they are many and they are complicated. Agriculture, rare earth, all of the other import and export issues involved here. And those are going to be a lot more complicated to deal with.
Mr. Lee, from Beijing's perspective, what internal and external factors make China willing to engage more actively now in negotiations at this moment?
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for having me again. From Beijing's perspective, the decision to re-engage is driven by both internal and external factors. Domestically, economic stability remains a first priority in China, with the government seeking to meet its goal target of around 5% GDP growth while managing property sector stress, local government debt, and a soft export environment. The leadership is also advancing its dual circulation strategy, letting the domestic market be the mainstay while keeping international flows open, and recognize that external stability helps soar up business confidence and employment, and externally rising protectionism, G7 export controls, and global diversification away from China pose risk to long-term competitiveness. Engaging in talks help manage this risk and ensure China remains central to supply chains. And in Confucian terms, this is first to stabilize the inside, then harmonize with the outside, and seeking harmony without demanding uniformity across the globe.
Is there significance for the timing or a political context of this renewed negotiation push?
Yes. In Washington, the U.S. administration wants a visible diplomatic wins before the next elections, creating space for deals that cool tensions without major concessions. And in Beijing, this year is also crucial for them because it's ahead of the next 5 years plan cycle, and the leadership wants more predict heading into key political meetings. There is also a desire to prevent multiple flashpoints like technology restrictions, South China Sea incidents, and the tariffs between China and US right now from escalating simultaneously. This push is therefore this escalation designed to set the stage for more stable engagement. So in Sun Tzu's words, the highest form of strategy is to shape the environment, not just to fight. And this is exactly what both sides, especially Chinese, is attempting to do so.
Peter, you said that the main concern will be, on TikTok, but also the earth minerals issue has been a flashpoint. What do you think is the leverage, or what leverage do rare earths give China? How the U.S. policies try to counter that?
Yeah. The TikTok deal is pretty much done, so let's put that aside. We'll hear within a matter of minutes or hours what the outcome is going to be on that. China is playing hardball, and they're very good at it. You just mentioned the rare earths. Putting restrictions on rare earth is a problem for American industries, particularly the defense industry and the auto industry that depends on that. What they've also done is they have put a halt on importing certain agricultural products from the US. This hurts the administration because most of the agricultural products come from the Midwest of the United States, which are generally strong Republican supporters. So the American administration has a big incentive to get that problem solved. China is also slow walking some of these negotiations. Here's an important thing to remember. Many American importers, Walmart being the largest from China, it imported a great deal of stuff in anticipation of the tariffs. But when they run out of these products, unless the tariffs are lowered, it's going to raise costs substantially and potentially increase American inflation. China knows this. So that pressure is also on the table during these negotiations. All of this to suggest, Hani, that this is a lot more complicated than people may think. But the good news is that China did agree to a deal on TikTok. One of the reasons for doing that was to facilitate a summit meeting in China between Trump and President Xi, which will also likely be announced as early as today.
Hmm. Well, Mr. Lee, how is China balancing its own growth targets and its need for foreign trade with growing global concerns over its export restrictions and supply chain influence?
Beijing is pursuing what it calls controlled openness. Instead of fully liberalizing or completely shutting off critical flows, China used licensing regimes and quota management to ensure rare earth metals that you have just mentioned, gallium, and also all those very important rare earth, very important raw materials and other strategic inputs continue reaching trust partners while preserving leverage. And this approach balanced the need to meet growth and employment growth with the strategic imperative of retaining bargaining power. And China is also diversifying its export mix and encouraging the domestic import substitutions to mitigate future shocks. So, like from my perspective, both China and U.S. live both together. They cannot work without with each other. The Chinese need American market. The American people need the Chinese market and the Chinese supplies. Like so, that's why I totally agree with my friends Peter has mentioned from Washington.
Hmm. Well, Peter, what do we know about the planned negotiation teams? Who will be involved? What sort of portfolios are we expecting? Commerce, treasury, trade? How binding or technical might their discussions be?
Well, the ongoing negotiations, and this is where most of the heavy lifting is going to take place, are the people you just named, Hani. The Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Commerce, and the U.S. Trade Negotiator. These are the three key people who are going to be involved in the negotiations, and they will be along the lines that we've already just mentioned. Main issues: computer chips, agriculture, rare earth. Remember, the United States is running a $300 billion annual trade deficit with China. So, the largest we have with any trading partner. So, it's understandable that the United States wants that deficit removed. So, these will be part of the issues that are discussed in the negotiations. One wants to be optimistic because both sides have a very important need to get this thing resolved. And the United States wants to get them resolved before the next midterm elections in November.
Hmm. Does that give China the upper hand then?
You could argue that, and this is why they're very good negotiators, and this is why they're slow walking some of these negotiations because the closer we get to November, the more the pressure is on. But it is important to understand, and China does, that a $300 billion trade deficit with China is not acceptable, and that has to be reduced. And that is what the Trump administration is trying to do in the big picture.
Mhm. Mr. Lee, how much of this is showmanship or diplomacy versus real policy shifts? Are we seeing genuine opening?
Actually, I can say both. This is a clear performative element designed to reassure markets and international partners, but the underlying policy tools are real. Licenses are being granted, code rules clarified, and compliance platforms strengthened. Beijing prefers measurable steps rather than a single grand bargain, and this allows us to reward a reciprocal approach and pull back if conditions has become from bad to worse. And in Chinese wisdom, we call this is a plan fully before taking action, meaning that these are carefully considered moves rather than symbolic gesture alone. So that's why China has been playing both paths. So the first one is to work with the USA, and the second is to explore new market across the globe, like Central Asia, Middle East, and Southeast Asia.
Mhm. Peter, in past instances, agreements have broken down over enforcement, trust issues, or unilateral actions. What do you see are the greatest risks now to any new deal sticking
Yeah,
rather?
it's a big danger here
Mhm.
too, because you're dealing with the two biggest superpowers in the world, and we cannot take for granted that, unlike the negotiations with other countries where a deal was almost certainly going to be made, the one with China is not so certain. So it will require, as our friend in China has just mentioned, a great deal of diplomacy, and it's going to require some hard work. In the end, one wants to be optimistic that it works to both sides' advantage for a deal to be negotiated. But in many of these areas, the details are troubling and will have to be worked on. So let's try to be positive while at the same time understanding how difficult this is going to be compared to other negotiations.
Mhm. Well, Mr. Lee, it probably will prove to be a little bit difficult, but do you see any red lines from the Chinese side of tech transfers, sovereignty, South China Sea, of course, export controls that are unlikely to be crossed in this negotiation?
Yes, definitely. There are three clear red lines that you have mentioned right now. The first, technologies such as advanced semiconductor designs, AI models like the algorithm behind TikTok, behind Temu, right? And enabling materials will remain tightly controlled because we have a proverb. A nation's vital tools are not lightly given away. Second, sovereignty issues. The South China Sea, Taiwan are not subjects of bargaining, and Beijing will resist linking them to trade negotiations with Americans or with other countries. And third, strategic resources like rare earth and some crucial raw materials will continue to be treated as managed assets with licensing and quotas tied to have a reciprocal approach in the future.
Mhm. Well, speaking of semiconductors, Peter, how might this affect the chip war, semiconductor war? Could sides agree to limits? Will we see a compromise, or will that remain a central tension?
Yeah, I think that this is one that will get resolved. Remember, the issue primarily with semiconductors is spying. In other words, and this has been the issue with TikTok, by the way, which China finally agreed to. The issue with TikTok was that this enable China to have data on all millions and millions of Americans who use it, and this creates a potential security hazard. So when we talk about the chips, it's going to be largely focused on security, and but I'm optimistic that this part of the trade negotiations can be resolved.
Mhm. Mr. Lee, what role do global supply chains and third country actors play in this negotiation? Companies outside the US or China, maybe, allies, shortages, what sort of role do they play?
This is a very good question indeed. Third countries act as both a pressure where a pressure point and a complicated factor. When tension rise, production and sourcing shift to hubs like Vietnam, Malaysia, Mexico, which reduce the bite of restrictions but also weaken Beijing's leverage in the long term. But at the same time, these countries benefit from stable US China's ties and lobby for this escalation. And let me give you an example here. I have lots of Chinese friends who have lots of factories in China. They also create other factories in Southeast Asia just to avoid the ongoing tariff and any uncertain position between US and China. And this is the first point. And I'm also a PhD researcher in the University of Manchester, and I have been researching that Saudi Arabia has been playing a hedging diplomacy, attracting the FDI from China to set up a regional headquarters in Saudi Arabia. For example, Alibaba and even Alipay just now is a today's news. So that the third country actors, they are playing hedging diplomacy to try to pursue to gain the most national benefit across these two superpowers.
Peter, what is the potential impact of these negotiations on the U.S. domestic politics, the business, manufacturing, the consumers, if tariffs are eased or export control relaxed?
Yeah, the impact, to use one of Donald Trump's favorite words, is huge because number one, employment in the United States, which, as you probably noticed, the Federal Reserve is particularly concerned about, which is why it lowered interest rates yesterday. Second, inflation. If we do not get a satisfactory resolution to the trade negotiations, it means that imports are going to cost a lot more, and that has a potential effect on inflation. Those two things alone are crucial to the American economy. We're talking about employment and inflation. So that would have a major political impact in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Lee, how is China then, how is it preparing for possible concessions domestically, in regulation or in diplomatic posture?
China is preparing both Plan A and B. On one hand, it continues to build resilience at home through import substitutions, industrial upgrading like Made in China 2025, and even rare earth stockpiling. So any concession does not undermine strategic security. On the other hand, it's creating regulatory and diplomatic space to over target openings. For example, pilot green lines for certain foreign products, uh, or limit tariff reductions in exchange for reciprocal moves. And the narrative is framed domestically as mutually beneficial cooperation, not as weakness, consistent with with a stable approach to travel afar.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you've mentioned that these negotiations will be very difficult and delicate. So what might be the economic costs if these negotiations fall apart again? How might markets, investors, and trade partners react?
Yeah, so the expected outcome of these negotiations, the desirable outcome, is for tariffs to continue to exist. There's no question that there will be tariffs, but that they are set at a level across the board that is acceptable and does not cause a higher rate of inflation in the United States. So that is the big picture objective. And it will vary from industry to industry as these negotiations take place. And that is where the devil is going to be in the details.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Lee, you said that there is a bit of showmanship in these negotiations. How much does geopolitical competition, military posturing, alliances, ideology continue to complicate what could otherwise be a purely economic negotiation?
Geopolitical rivalry remains the underlying current situation. US alliances like Australia, UK, US, and even work with India and Japan, and military transit near Taiwan, and ideological framing around this de-risking, like China plus one, all create suspicion that economic talks are not purely about trade, but a part of a larger containment strategy from the Chinese perspective. Beijing therefore used trade talks as a stabilizing mechanism, using economics to manage frictions among countries. This does not eliminate rivalry but keeps it below the level of open confrontation, allowing both sides to focus on areas where cooperation is still possible. But at the same time, China has been playing a larger role in the global south, for example, working with Brazil, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and also to upgrade uh, its flagship project, Belt and Road Initiative, in order to gain more momentum and bargaining power across the globe.
Mm. Peter, do you foresee a summit between Trump and Xi in the near future? What conditions would need to be met if that is to happen? What would its agenda likely include?
Yeah, I think a summit is almost certain, and I think it will be announced imminently. That is part of the deal on TikTok. I think the Chinese very much wanted the summit to take place, and it was one of the motivations for giving in pretty much on the TikTok deal. As with all presidential summits, most of the work will be done in advance by the combination of Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary, trade negotiators. Those will have been pre negotiated, not down to every detail, but basic guidelines of a deal will have been done before the two presidents meet, so that there is very little chance that the two presidents meet and walk away without some sort of a handshake. This is really important because for the United States, if we do not have a deal with China, China will then start forging closer relationships, and I think Mr. Lee hinted at this as well,
Mm-hmm.
with other adversaries of the United States. I shouldn't use the word adversaries, but trading partners, where we're not having very good relations right now, India being a particularly good one. And, China can take the position that, look, the United States is not a really good, reliable trade partner. Look what's happened with you. Let's get together and talk. This is not a very desirable outcome for the United States. And it will also be part of the trade. It will also be part of the negotiations that are about to take place.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Lee, one final question. What would be signs to watch in the coming weeks that the thaw is real and substantial rather than temporary?
Okay, there are a few key indicators here. So, like key indicators will be wherever licensing approvals for critical mineral accelerates, wherever tariff on select goods, maybe computers, maybe AI, quietly lowered, and wherever both governments release joint statement with language moving from managing difference to expanding cooperation between both sides. And another signs would be the resumption of major joint ventures or investment plus signaling confidence from the private sectors. And as the saying goes, listen to their words but observe their actions. And real movement will be seen in trade data and regulatory notice, not just diplomatic press release in the upcoming weeks.
Mr. Peter Tannis and Mr. Marvin Lee, gentlemen, thank you very much for your valuable insights into this turning point in US-China relations. As Trump and Xi take steps towards renewed dialogue, the world will be anticipating what happens next. Trade, technology and trust remain at stake. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or just a pause, we will be following up all the developments on this file. That concludes today's episode of In Depth. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.